Welcome back. Welcome back to the show, Indestructible Souls. I am your host, Jonathan Beauregard. This is the podcast for mental wellness for African American men and boys. And we're back for another Sunday edition of the podcast. It's been a great week. Before I get started, I want to let everybody know to go to YouTube at Indestructible Souls. You can check out all past shows and live shows at Indestructible Souls on YouTube. Go to the page, subscribe, get the notifications and all that good stuff. Still not a perfect YouTuber, but it is what it is. As long as the message gets across. And don't forget, I am a licensed psychotherapist, and you can find me at Beauregard Therapy. You can find me at Beauregard Therapy at www.beauregardtherapy.com and at Psychology Today and all that good stuff. There's a lot of good things in the works. And, we're going to continue to do the work and help people improve their lives. So once again, I am Jonathan Beauregard. I am the host of Indestructible Souls, and I'm going to do part 2 on blended family. Last week I talked a little bit about, various scenarios when we talk about being in blended families and some of the things that we're faced with when people come together and they have children at various stages. Maybe they have adult children, teenage children, or smaller school-age children, and people decide to blend families. My thought continues to be that many people go into these situations with a mistaken belief or unrealistic or unsustainable expectations, and oftentimes it creates a recipe for failure and a lot of family stress. So what I mean by that is going into having a blended family in this day and age. Like I said, I don't know if it's more likely than a traditional family. However, it is very common that as we get older and people enter into secondary relationships, what I mean by secondary is if you've been married before and divorced or in a long-term relationship and have had kids, and you go into a new relationship, now we're talking about a relationship after where you already have kids and such. I see a lot of people go in with mistaken beliefs and expectations, like I said, are unrealistic and unsustainable. And so I kind of wanted to go over some of those things so people can have a real understanding or expectation and what reality looks like when you have the various combinations of a blended family. So today, I really wanted to talk about a scenario that I see a lot, right? So oftentimes we have, well, what I see in a lot of is, say a man has a relationship, he has kids, no matter what age, whether they're adolescent, school age, whatever it may be, and they may be either in the custody of the mom, the biological mom, and there's some type of visitation, right? And then now this person is in a new relationship, whether the woman in the new relationship has kids or not. So for this scenario, briefly, here's what I want to talk about, particularly to the men that's in that scenario. Meaning, from a man's vantage point, he has a new girlfriend or a new wife. He has either a new set of step kids or they're planning to have kids. And then he has an ex, whether it's a baby mama or a divorced wife, whatever you want to call it. He has that person who's involved, and then he has the children. What I see often is that men try to take a passive approach to being in that scenario. So I really want to just today briefly talk specifically to that scenario where you as a man are in the middle of a scenario where you have a new spouse, either new stepchildren or children on the way or potential children. And then you also have your biological children and the ex. So let me get started. Here's what I say to men in that situation. The first thing that you have to understand, and I know it doesn't feel good, but one of the first things you have to understand is you are in a no-win situation. There is not a scenario for you to win. Here's what I mean by that. Now, in a fantasy world where everyone cooperates, maybe. Here's what I mean by that. Is in a fantasy world where the ex gets along with the new spouse, there's a perfect schedule for visitation, and everyone is cooperative, then maybe you're in a win situation. However, the only way you can get to that scenario, most of us have to understand that we're in a no-win situation. However, here's what I see often is that men fade to the back, fade to the background, and either give up the fight, try to please everybody, or try to please nobody, and then everybody's unhappy. But the problem is you are in a no-win situation, and then I see a lot of men take a passive or passive-aggressive approach to being in this scenario. What I am saying, young men or older men, understanding that you're in a no-win situation, the best case scenario for you to do is to be in control of the situation. What do I mean by that? I was speaking with someone a couple of days ago, and they're in this exact scenario, and the new girlfriend says, if you're going to have a relationship with your biological child from a previous relationship, I want to be the one to communicate with your ex. I want to be the one that coordinates everything and so forth. That is the biggest mistake you can make. Your new girlfriend or your new spouse has nothing to do with your old scenario. And so when I say your only way that you can control this or have a shot at happiness is by being in control, it is your responsibility to navigate, control, to coordinate, and so forth, the relationship with your ex and your children. It is not your new spouse's responsibility. Here's the other thing. Not only is it not your new spouse's responsibility, you have to take control and understand that nobody is always going to be happy. So the best thing you could do is to have those uncomfortable conversations with your new spouse and let her know what it's going to be. A lot of times what we see happen is insecurity sets in terms of, and I say on both sides. The new spouse doesn't want the man to have a relationship with the old spouse out of insecurity, and we could go down the list of things that could possibly happen. And then the man relents and submits to that toxic energy to not lose the new relationship, and then everything goes to shit. What I'm saying, young men, is that you have to be in control of your scenario. You're in a no-win position, and here's how it needs to play out. You have those tough conversations with your new spouse, and if you have to fight the old spouse in court, take them to court. Here's the problem. And I know women get favor in court in most scenarios. But a lot of men make mistakes because they go, or they either hesitate to go to court and get the proper visitation, and or instead of getting the proper visitation, they don't fight on principle. And you have to, men, have to be just as game and just as willing to fight in court as your ex is. And getting your visitation and following the court orders. Now, here's how this works. While you're fighting for visitation and having to communicate with the ex, then a lot of times what I see and what people come to me about is now that creates a strain in the current relationship. And here's why I think that happens. Even in new relationships, and men have past relationships, whether there's children involved and an ex involved, the current girlfriend, wife, fiance, whatever it may be, struggles to see that another woman has any level of authority, power, say so, restriction, and so forth on her man. Struggles with it. The other thing is, if there's insecurity, they also struggle if there is a cordial relationship. Then the old relationship becomes a threat. So for you young men, you have to understand that there's very little, if any, scenarios that you can win at. So you have to be matter of fact. You have to set boundaries. And here's the most important. Do not succumb to wishes and demands that are not reasonable or unsustainable. And what we see happen often is we make these agreements that are not reasonable and are not sustainable. And we do them to appease people's insecurities or unrealistic expectations or unrealistic demands. So when it comes to the current spouse, to put it short, she needs to be put in check, and you have to clearly lay out what your intent is and how you're going to play it out. And for the ex, if there isn't cooperation, you have to be just as willing to go to court as she is. And then for the children, it is your job to nurture that relationship. It is not your new spouse's job to nurture that relationship. That spouse has zero rights. That spouse can have influence. They can build a relationship, but it is not your job it's not their job to nurture the visitation. It's not their job to nurture the activities on a visitation and so forth. That is your job, young sir. Stop putting these women in positions, and then when things go bad, you have no control over your scenario. What I learned or figured out the hard way is that by allowing too many people to have say so, And not being in control of the scenario, it made things worse. So, and I get people are uncooperative, and that's when the court system has to come into play. But when you have this blended system, you cannot expect things to play out like a traditional Brady Bunch scenario. So when you look at the Brady Bunch, and there was, that's a blended family, that's not reality. I don't ever remember hearing about the other biological parents. So that Brady Bunch thing is a fantasy. So when you talk about men being in the middle of this situation, and what happens is you're in a no-win situation, you have to take control. You have to be at the driver's seat. You have to set boundaries, and you have to be clear about how you're going to navigate your family, how you're going to navigate their lives. I see too many people, too many men release control to the new spouse, and understand this. And they release things to the new spouse, and things go to shit. Now, here's the other thing that you guys don't realize. Sometimes the new spouse will do it because they feel safer doing it, because they feel like they're in control and it soothes their insecurity. However, don't ever expect that new spouse don't resent those kids and don't resent those situations. Because these are now kids that they have to take care of, and the children and the situation is taking away from their fantasy of why they got with you in the first place. Because they're an added expense. It takes time away from them. It takes resources away from them. It causes you to have to still communicate with the ex and all sorts of things. So these scenarios aren't easy. But the best way for it to work in your favor is for you to be at the helm. When it's time to go to court, when it's time to communicate with the spouse, appointments, doctor's appointments, school appointments, and so forth, you got to be at the driver's seat. It is not your new spouse's job. Yet again, like I said last week, they play a role, they have influence, but it's not their responsibility. And here's the other piece to that. Moving further down the line, what we see happen is now in the new relationship, there's new kids involved. So let's just say your new spouse has children, and you have children from a previous relationship. Let's just say you now together have a biological child. So you got his, hers, and ours. If you don't think that's going to change the entire dynamic of your family, you're sadly mistaken. That scenario where there's his, there's hers, and now we have our own together completely changes the dynamic of the family. And when you talk about not being in a no-win situation, and I'm not coming at it from this angle saying that there's not a chance at happiness, but your only chance at peace and happiness is to be at the controls. Here's what I see happen when we add in the new relationship now produces a biological child. Not only you have more children to nurture, but now how you nurture your biological child, how you nurture, your joint biological child that's in the home, how you nurture your biological children from previous relationship, and then how you nurture your stepchildren, whole nother ball game. So what I think is important is for when we understand these situations and understand what we're getting into, is that being realistic and not fantasizing and not having unrealistic expectations is key. Here's one of the things that happens, and I'm going to speak about this briefly, and I'm going to be done for today. Is if you don't think your relationship with your other biological children are going to change when you and the new spouse have children, it's going to change in an instant. Because now you have people watching how you father everyone else and how you build relationship with your new biological child and compare it to how you treat everyone else. Which means you, dad, have to be intentional about how you continue to nurture those various relationships. It's a lot of work. So I'm not going to go in too much detail about that, but I wanted to make that point. So for men in a blended situation, you have to be in control of the blended situation. Using reason, using logic, setting boundaries, not succumbing to unrealistic expectations, not agreeing to things that's not sustainable, being in control and being willing to fight. If we have to go to court, being willing to go to court and not relinquishing control to your new spouse. So when we talk about blended families, they don't operate like traditional families. And we have to be aware of that. Once again, my name is Jonathan Beauregard. I am your host of Indestructible Souls. You can catch it live on YouTube, Facebook. Also, you can check out the practice at beauregardtherapy.com. Once again, enjoy your weekend, and we're out.